Devin Townsend Band. From there, he pursued a broad solo career. You were abroad?
I know, no.
Okay, well, to each his own. A broad solo career in which he explored many different styles of music and dedicated and developed the trademark production style he's known for today. Devin's creative approach to multi-track mixing has placed him among the ranks of Phil Spector and Frank Zappa. Leading up to that.
It's not going to happen.
Ladies and gentlemen, Devin Townsend.
Yes!
What are you guys doing?
Awesome! Right, I'm an extreme metal guitar player, of course.
Yes.
Most extreme. Yes, we have to be subtle here, guys. This whole presentation is about whether or not we can operate with decorum and class in the ways that Sweetwater has become accustomed to. So let's keep that in mind. And I'll start by saying that I thank that gentleman very much for not pointing out that I couldn't pee prior to the presentation. It's because when there's anybody, I know, sorry. When there's anybody around anywhere, I just can't do it. It just, tap is off. So, thank you so much for taking me to the back, and it was like the Mecca. It was the bathroom Mecca. The water was warm, there was like soft cello music playing. It was just so absolutely one of those perks for doing this here today. So, I'm incredibly tired. I'm in the middle of mixing a bunch of records, and I was here last year or a year ago, and it was a whole different group of people. It was the industry people, and they were giving me the total stink eye from the beginning until I got really self-deprecating and said the word dubious a whole bunch of times, and they lightened up, and then I let them have it. So this time, thank you guys for coming here, and you guys can leave, that's totally fine. But essentially, I thought to myself last night, amidst total lack of sleep, what are we going to talk about? I got an hour. Well, actually, I got 57 minutes. So what are we going to talk about? We're at Sweetwater. We've got gear. Gear's coming out of our proverbial things that gear comes out of. And so what can I spend this time talking about? I've been doing this for 25 years. I'm Canadian. That's why I'm going to say about the whole time. And it's going to be increasingly more prevalent as the time goes on, so just get used to it. And gear, music. Here I am, 25 years in, 30 records deep into this thing. I don't know why I do this. What did I want to do when I was a little guy? I worked at a welding fabrication place. We did sheet metal fabrication. I worked at like 15 restaurants. It's the thing. But I think I am wired to do music. So here I am, and the whole, I got a guitar. It's my background thing because I didn't have enough time to prepare a background musical number. I thought I'd just sort of entertain myself and you with a bit of this. Anyway, don't lose track. Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous because you got your little dinky microphone. You're talking to a group of people about things that you're not comfortable with. Don't let that get to you. Okay? Okay. So, gear. How does it affect your creative process? That's what I thought would be a cool topic to go on. And so check this out. I went back online last night in my underpants after Rick took me to a really fancy meal, and I was sitting there for the first couple of minutes poking my belly fat, just being like, why don't you just go to the gym? Forget it. So I went online and I started back with the very first guitar and amp and all that stuff that I ever owned, and I tried to put it in a chronological order so I can explain how gear has affected my musical development. Is that, can we get away with that? That's interesting, right? Yeah, okay. So check it out. I started with the logo, right? The little red skin. So, music for me. There we go.
Famous.
Come on, smile, buddy. It's banjo. No, okay. So, I know that's Canadian guitar. That's right. So music for me started, I think, essentially with my grandfather. And he wanted to be a musician, but he had absolutely no sense of timing. So when Christmas time came along, he'd get hammered and just insist that we all sat around the piano while he just bashed out Johnny Cash on. He'd be like, come on into standard chord progression, son, you got it. And we're just like, I hear that train coming. We couldn't do it well enough. And so I think to this day that's affected my connection to singing. I'm like, don't you dare tell me what to sing. And I don't like to sing. And I think it's just because of that experience. It's amazing how psychologically it's all tied into Grandpa! And anyway, while we were doing those Christmas things, this frameless banjo was sitting right beside the piano, and it was a piece of crap. And that is one I took off the internet, so that wallpaper there is not indicative of my childhood, or else it would be a mottled and depressed mess. But that was it. My dad used to play it until he worked at the metal shop too, and he lost his middle finger.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. So I inherited the banjo.
That's awesome.
And then someone came to my high school, like a troupe of musicians, and they explained what the instruments did. It was like, this is a banjo, this is a bass, this is an electric guitar. And I remember thinking, man, I would love to play the electric guitar. I could be in the Monkees, you know? So I begged my parents. I was like, I have to play guitar. It's my calling. And at that point, I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, and puberty was kicking in. I was interested in heavy metal all of a sudden. And so the combination of all that, and the begging and all this, my parents set out and bought me that! Now, surprising as it may seem, there are Sears in Canada. They deliver by walrus to our igloo. And it came one frosty April morning, and I opened it up and I was like, this is my guitar. Sweet. And my dad, who's very pragmatic sort, was just like, until you master that, you get nothing. So I was like, all right. So I sat on top of my bunk bed, and I learned Motorhead by Motorhead on that. And I learned, what's that song by Crocus? Midnight Maniac by Crocus. It was a different tuning. Just as a point of reference, I've been in open C for basically my whole career, so any of those examples are going to fall short. But I learned Motorhead by Motorhead and Midnight Maniac on that thing, and very poorly. But because when it started getting into like Randy Rhoads and all these sorts of things, he required a whammy bar. As luck would have it, the neck joint split. So I'd be sitting on top of the bunk bed having tea. Whoa! It would go up like an octave and a half. And after showing my parents that, they were convinced that I had indeed mastered that. And if I went on to mow lawns and do all these things that, you know, adolescent young males tend to do to try and buy electric guitars in the early 80s, you could buy something. And so here's the preface for the guitar that changed everything for me. And the point of this conversation, or this one-way conversation, that the happy accidents is what has defined my music career. Because I wanted the cool guitars. I wanted the Les Paul. I wanted the Strat. I wanted all the cool stuff. But you couldn't afford it. So at that time, the local music store along McQuaid up in Vancouver had a wall of these really cheap intro guitars. Hondo was one. Series A was another. But the one that I decided on was a Vantage Avenger. Right? More based on the fact that it was a name. It's, you know, it's avenging something, which is pretty metal in itself. And that was it, in that color. It was off red with a maple neck and a maple fretboard, and I was disappointed with it because it wasn't an Ibanez with, you know, periwinkle bolt-on with a monkey grip or whatever was cool in '83. But it was really actually a really good guitar. But thus begins the whole happy accidents part of it, because I thought, okay, well, I'll make it polished. I want a high gloss guitar. So I took out the Pledge and I polished down my matte finish guitar. I ended up with this horrible looking sort of modeled guitar that nobody else had. So that's it. In high school, we were in metal shop making throwing stars and whammy bars, and you know, everybody's writing out, you know, eruption text, trying to get each other into. That was a big thing. I had this really dorky guitar, but it sounded better than all these other guys' guitars, so I just kept at it. So next on my list of happy, I made notes backstage there, having to be, but I got through it nonetheless. All right, so my parents saw that I was happily playing under my bunk bed on my very quiet guitar, and I was begging for an amplifier. So Christmas time came, grandfather came over and he ate a little metal thing, and we had to take him to the hospital, but we sang. And the next morning, amidst that very odd, traumatic evening, this was there. Yeah! My very first amp, ladies and gentlemen. D. Markley was the name of this amplifier, right? D. Markley. Thought they made strings, but they made that. And again, what I really wanted was a Marshall. It was the thing that I thought would be cool. All the other kids had a little Marshall. It was like the thing to get. But I got a brown D. Markley amp. And my first reaction was the same as with the guitar. I was like, well, this isn't really what I thought would be cool. This isn't where I'm going to go. I want to be Paul Gilbert or one of these cats. So I played along and realized it was a good amp. And then 2 weeks into it, an epiphany happened in the way of this little button up there that said drive. Yeah, I didn't. Well, what does it do? It turned me into like a really bad sounding version of a Marshall. But no, it was actually really good. It was a good amplifier. But the whole overdrive part of it was like, well, that's it. That's what drive is. I get it. I thought that was called distortion. I thought that was called awesome. I thought it was called this, that, or the other thing. But no, it's called drive. So I was playing along, and I remember thinking, well, my favorite band at the time was Judas Priest. That's kind of how I rolled. I was like 13. I was like, whoever died, I want to have my, Blackie Lawless and drinking blood out of his skull, because that's really tough. So I like Judas Priest, but in hindsight, the thing that I really enjoyed about Judas Priest was the echo. Everything had echo on it. Rob Halford's voice had echo on it. Kiki Downing's guitar had echo on it. And the combination of all that made the interaction between the notes really peculiar. You could get dissonances based on what you had played before. So I wanted a delay. I didn't know I wanted a delay in the same way I didn't know I wanted a drive. I thought I wanted echo or reverb or something. So don't yawn. You stop that. I know, right? Now it's going up. It ain't gonna get more exciting. I'm going up. I got like reams of this stuff. So I wanted an echo. I didn't know I wanted an echo. And the local music store said, "What you want, son, is a delay." And I was like, "I got tons of delays here. I didn't get a Marshall." So essentially, I went looking and I thought, okay, I'll get a delay. I realized the vernacular of the musical community was it's not echo or super awesome epicizer, it's delay. So I found that. Right? And it only had 300 milliseconds in Kick You Down and was at about 440. So, again, it was another one of those situations where I had this guitar that was a little peculiar, this brown amplifier that if I was looking for this one sound, it didn't do the same, but if I had my own unique sort of thing going on with it, it sounded unlike any others. And the same with this. I wanted that sound of the crystalline delays that were trailing after your guitar notes. But instead, I was running it into my driven amp, and it's turned into this big blur of sound. And my first reaction to it was disappointment. I was like, well, that's not what I'm looking for. But as a result of that, I found that you could create this sort of atmosphere by running the delay in front and just putting the repeats on full. And in a sense, it became this way for me to learn how to orchestrate sounds based on this accident. And this delay, I remember at that time writing songs about rain, for example, because I'd be playing these sounds, I'd be like, well, that sounds like a sort of rainy day. It sounds like a rainy sort of atmosphere. So the mistakes that were sort of forcing themselves upon me in terms of my creative process were becoming, even at that stage, part of the identity. So there it is. Gear has been completely attached to my creative process since the beginning. Okay. Now here we're going to get into the other side of the equation, in that there's certain things that you think are going to make a huge impact in your musical world. You think, okay, if I spend the right amount of money on this cork sniffing amplifier, the one with the tungsten dipped kerfuffle buffers, and they've been hand applying the acid around the cone so it reacts like an old speaker, it's going to be the greatest. But oftentimes that's not what happens. Those things end up sort of backfiring on you. So the next thing I got was this. Oh no, this is my recorder. Ghetto blaster, right? There's my notes. Yeah, okay, so I'm trying to mix all this in, my gear as well as the recording thing. So when I started, I loved the idea of overdubbing. Wanted a 4-track machine, couldn't afford it. Had this, 1983, Rebel Yell. Hey, who's there?